Hi, this is Rick Yates, Technical Services Manager for GGS Pro and Griffin. First of all, I want to thank you for being part of the Griffin Virtual Expo for 2021. We all would like to be doing this in person, and perhaps next year we will. But thanks so much for being a part of this. And today's educational seminar will be on hot topics in pest control. We have a lot of ground to cover, and we'll be zigzagging back and forth a little bit, but I hope that it'll be information you'll find useful and you can apply in your own greenhouse or nursery. Whenever we're talking about pesticides, it's important to us to go through these disclaimers. One is that although we will be using excerpts from labels, it's the grower's responsibility to read all the way through the label before you use any of these pesticides. And also, just a reminder that labels change fairly often and they're not announced. So when you get new material into your operation, make sure you read through the label. And also, we're going to talk about products we have a lot of confidence in that have good to excellent efficacy. There may be other products out there that are labeled, legal, and effective as well. Going to talk about new fungicides. Last year, we really didn't have any new fungicides to talk about, but some good news coming this year. Evelio from BASF is now available. It is produced in a soluble concentrate form, which a lot of our growers prefer when compared to wettable powders or WDGs. It is labeled for ornamentals only, no edible crops, but it is quite versatile. It can be applied as a foliar spray for a number of foliar diseases, but also is labeled as a root rot drench, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. It is from mode of action 3, and when there are some good products such as TerraGuard and Eagle that are from that same mode of action. However, this product is a little different from them chemically, has some additional bonding sites, and as of now, we're not aware of any cross resistance with those products. It is translaminar in activity, and I'd like to define that. When we talk about a translaminar systemic, what we mean is that when a product is applied to a leaf surface, that over a period of several hours to maybe a couple of days, depending on the chemical, it will translocate through to the bottom of the leaf. And obviously that's a really valuable trait to have. We still want to get the best coverage we can, but products such as Evelio will move around and help us out. It also has some persistence to it as well, and it can be thought of as both a preventative and a curative product. As you can see from the list, there's a lot of important foliar diseases that it controls, and Coleotrichum actually is a broader term that includes a lot of diseases such as anthracnose and so forth that you might be more familiar with those names, but quite a few leaf spots and powdery mildew, and then really like other mode of action 3 products that's really effective against scabs and rusts as well. And you see from the soil drenches, Cylindrocaladium and Thalaviopsis, and heaven knows we need more effective products for Thalaviopsis. We have a very small pond of effective products for that. Evelio can be used in greenhouses and also in outdoor nurseries, and if you're involved in interior scapes, you can apply it there as well. We're really happy to see that a lot of the chemical companies have been listening to us when we tell them we need to have labels that are friendly for fogging. GGS Pro is a big proponent of ultra low volume applications such as the dram equipment, and it really helps to have labels that are amenable to that. So we're really happy that Evelio can be fogged. Is rain fast in 1 hour. A nice trait, especially if you make applications outdoors. I know some growers that think just by hooking up their sprayer and going outside they can make it rain. And so it's really nice to know that an hour after it's applied, it is firmly fastened to the leaf surfaces. Excellent plant safety, including open blooms. We have no reports of phytotoxicity from the trials. Like a lot of products, we do recommend the use of a high quality surfactant such as Capsule. It has a 12-hour REI. Guarda is a new fungicide bactericide from Biosafe, and it's based on thyme oil. And we've known about the fungicidal properties of thyme oil for a long time, but it was such a short-lived product that the commercial effectiveness of it really didn't quite measure up. However, there's a patented plant-based polymer that causes the Guarda to stay active for up to 14 days, and now it's quite a different story. You can see that there's a number of very important diseases that are labeled for Guarda, including botrytis and downy mildew and all kinds of fungal leaf spots, and it's even labeled as a soil drench. We don't have as much information on that as we do the foliar diseases, but this is a really versatile product. Gourd is not only labeled for ornamentals, but it has a very broad label that includes fruits, vegetables, and herbs all produced in the greenhouse, even these products grown on to harvest. It's best used preventatively, but we would tell you that about most fungicides. You're really better off trying to apply it preventatively than come from behind. It also has a plant dip on the label, and it's a topic that a lot of growers are having more interest in, and we'll talk about plant dips a little bit later on in this presentation. So you can see it has just a 0-hour REI and a 0-day PHI for those edible crops. Postiva from Syngenta is not yet available, but we have on good authority from Syngenta that come February 1st of 2022, it'll be available on the market, and Griffin will surely have it. It's a unique combination of mode of action. I'm not aware of any other products with mode of action 3 and 7. We just talked about mode of action 3 when we were discussing Avalio. Mode of action 7 is a good knockdown class of fungicides that you'll see as one of the 2 ingredients in products such as Pageant and Mural, Broadform, Orchestra. They all contain a mode of action 7 to add a knockdown to the strobilurons, which are the other active ingredients. Again, it's an SC formulation, which our growers really like. Very broad spectrum. In fact, we expect at least some edible crops to be on the label. We don't yet know whether that will be for vegetable transplants or for vegetables grown on to harvest, but it's good to know that should be coming on the final label. Also, it have a broad label in terms of being able to use in commercial greenhouses, interior scapes, and even commercial landscapes. Not only does it control some important fungal diseases, but you'll see that it also controls bacterial diseases, and we really need some new modes of action for those types of diseases. It can be applied as a spray or a drench to your irrigation system or as a fog. We have been hoping for a new mode of action to use against powdery mildew for a long time, and OHP has finally delivered it, a product called Cyto. It's a flowable suspension, so a nice liquid formulation to work with. There's no other products from this mode of action that we use in horticulture. We're running into more and more powdery mildew that is resistant to some of our standby chemicals, so we are really excited about this. It will only be labeled for ornamentals, but you can use it as a spray or a fog, which is really helpful. Also, we mentioned translaminar activity already, but Cyto also has something called vapor activity. And what this means is that after it's applied for a period of time, when it gets wet, either from an irrigation or from condensation on the leaves, that it actually it creates a vapor activity where it'll creep along and attach itself to the cuticle, the waxy surface on the leaves. And generally we lose control with a fungicide or an insecticide when new foliage comes out that no longer has the active ingredient on it. So for a period of time, Cyto will creep and cover the new foliage coming out of the growing tips to extend the length of control. It has just a 4-hour REI, and it's rain fast in 30 minutes, and once again, excellent plant and bloom safety. So I think Cyto is a product that should be on everybody's shelf. When we have some new introductions of fungicides, I think it's a good idea to stop and see how they fit in with the current products that are available, see how we might add that to our rotation. With Avalio being a mode of action 3, even though it has some unique chemical properties to it, we're going to suggest that you don't rotate within that column. Moving to the center, mode of action 7 and 11 products. These are very popular fungicides that are very effective against powdery mildew. Mode of action 7 are fungicides that have a good knockdown for existing problems. Mode of action 11 are strobiluron fungicides. While they don't have a knockdown, they're very broad spectrum and they're also long lasting. So that combination makes for some very effective treatments. Firm is actually considered a biopesticide by EPA. It is labeled for edible crops. I want to mention that anytime you see an asterisk next to one of these products in a slide, you know that it is has at least some edible crops on the label. But Firm has excellent plant safety also on open blooms. A very broad label that includes vegetables and herb crops on it. We also use Firm for botrytis and rhizoctonia. So great new product with a 4-hour REI. All the way to the right, Milstop and Xeritol, both of these products we would consider quick knockdowns. They will kill exposed spores of powdery mildew and kill them quickly, but they don't have any residual activity to them, so you're going to want to follow up with something else right away. All the products on this page should be considered preventatives for powdery mildew. There's two ways that you might use them. One would be on crops that are highly susceptible to powdery mildew, things like Gerber daisies and dahlias. You may want to use these products preventatively to try to stop the disease from occurring in the first place. The other way that you might use them is that if you've had an outbreak and you've used one of the products on the previous slide to knock it down, then it would make good sense to follow with one of these products to make sure that we don't have a reoccurrence and allow you to rotate to a different mode of action, since we already mentioned how much trouble we're having with resistance to powdery mildew. The microbial products that are in the second column from the left are all based on different strains of Bacillus subtilis. They're broad spectrum, and they have a residual control from 1 maybe to 2 weeks, and excellent plant safety as well. And they can also be tank mixed with some of the knockdown products to give you preventative control at the same time. So we really like them a lot. They're all labeled for edible crops. Most of them are OMRI listed, a lot to like from those, and we recommend them extensively. Daconil has been around for a long time. As you can see from the mode of action code, M5 means it has multiple modes of action. And those products tend not to be subject to resistance, and such is the case with Daconil, which I think was released sometime after World War II, and there's still no known resistance to it. Daconil does leave a little bit of residue, and it can be hard on open bloom, so this is something we tend to use earlier on in the crop. As we get closer to sale time, we switch over to something else, and now you have the new product from mode of action 50, Cyto from OHP. There's some quick updates on some other products I wanted to mention to you. MP has received a 2EE label recommendation that allows it to be used as a plant dip in all but 4 states. And I mentioned we'll be talking about plant dips a little bit later on. And Coral, which is a microbial insecticide that our growers really like and been very successful with it, has had some production issues. And we understand from OHP that'll be resolved very soon. So that should be back on the market soon. Spectral, on the other hand, is still not available. We're not sure. We don't have a firm date when it'll be available again. If this is a product that you like to use, you can mix your own by using Daconil and one of the T-methyl products, such as the Cleary's 3336 or OHP's 6672. We can help you make a formulation that will give you the same combination of active ingredients as the Spectro 90. Companion, the liquid formulation had been off the market for a while. It's now back with a full biofungicide label, and it's now called Companion Max. Syngenta has heard the cries of many small to medium-sized growers to make some of their key products available in smaller containers. Heritage not only is available as an SC rather than the WDG that it was previously, but it's also available in a 4-ounce container, which will help a lot of our growers. Acelepryn, which really started out more as a nursery product, but now has a greenhouse label, very long-lasting insecticide. It's most similar to mainspring, and that product's now available in a 4-ounce container rather than the half-gallon size as it was previously. And Barricade, which is probably our biggest selling sprayable pre-emergent herbicide, now can be purchased in a 4-ounce container as well. It's been a little while since we talked to you about Capsule. Capsule is considered an organosilicon blend of a surfactant, and what surfactants do for us when we include it in our sprays, it breaks the surface tension. Normally water will just beat up on leaf surfaces, especially those that are particularly waxy or hairy, and so we don't get very good coverage on the leaf. By breaking surface tension, it causes the pesticide spray to spread out uniformly over the leaf surface, giving us better coverage, which is really important. But also, in pesticides that leave a residue, using a surfactant such as Capsule will greatly reduce the amount of visible residue. And of course, our customers would prefer that we didn't spray anything, so having a chalky residue on the plant certainly can be negative. The other big change, and the reason I wanted to mention it today, is the fact for many years we told you not to use Capsule with the strobilurin fungicides, and some of them actually had that information on the label, and the thought was that it might interfere with the mode of action of those fungicides. Well, we've been told by the manufacturers of the products below, and some really important products for us, is that because Capsule is actually what's considered an organosilicon blend, that you can safely use Capsule with all of those fungicides, which is a really nice benefit for us. Want to make sure you heard about that. You'll see that our bulletins will be changing as we redo them to make a note of that fact. And also, probably since the last time we talked about it is when it became OMRI listed, if that's important to you. Most of us that have been growing for a while are well aware of what impatiens downy mildew has done to the impatiens walleriana trade in the United States. It's just a sliver of what it used to be. The good news is there's some really nice varieties that have been developed that have resistance to impatiens downy mildew. We need to point out that even though they're resistant, it doesn't mean they're immune. In fact, with both of these series of impatiens, we have seen impatiens downy mildew on them. Don't be too disappointed, even though it breaks through sometimes. We know that these series of impatiens with the resistance built in are much less damaged by infections than traditional impatiens, which are normally killed outright. Both of these, we've seen them grow along with it and still put pretty good garden performance out there, even though they eventually became infected with impatiens downy mildew. We'll recommend, and the suppliers of these varieties also recommend, that you do still make some preventative applications in order to make sure that we get the maximum mileage out of these resistant cultivars. We're going to recommend Segavis soon after they're transplanted into their final containers. The residual from Segavis is so long that certainly if you apply it in the greenhouse phase, it will get, when they get transplanted outside, it'll get them through the cool, wet spring weather that is really favorable for impatiens downy mildew. And by the time the Segavis wears out, you'll be well into the summer season when it's hot and dry, and they should be in really good shape from that point on. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Segavis because it is so unique. There is no other mode of action 49 product that's available to greenhouse and nursery growers. It does have the translaminar movement that we talked about. When it's drenched, it has what's called acropetal movement, and what it means is it gets into the vascular system of the plant, the xylem tissue, which is what pumps things up from the root system up to the foliage. And that is the reason why it can have such extremely long residual, because it continues to protect the new foliage by continually moving more active ingredient up into them. It controls downy mildew for up to 8 weeks. In fact, in some of the trials that Syngenta has conducted, it's lasted longer than that. And that should be more than enough to get them out of the greenhouse phase through the cool, wet spring weather and safely into summertime. It has just a 4-hour REI. It's so safe, it doesn't even have a signal word on the label, and you can apply it through injectors. So we think the world of Segavis. It is the best product, in my opinion, on the market for downy mildew, and I would add Phytophthora to that as well. This information on managing downy mildew outbreaks will apply to impatiens downy mildew, but there's quite a few other crops that get it as well, and it would apply to them. We try to make sure that we, through good scouting, we catch these infections early. The sporulation that occurs with downy mildew is highly infective and moves around the greenhouse readily. So if you can catch it early, bag those plants up, get them out of the greenhouse, and you need to dispose of them off-site because the sporulation can easily travel back into the greenhouse on air currents sucked in through the fan, so we don't want to reinfect other crops with it. We're going to recommend that you start your battle with downy mildew by drenching with either Subdue Max or Segavis. Now, in the case of impatiens downy mildew, we know that there are some strains of it in Europe and in Florida that have shown to be resistant to Subdue Max, but there's lots of different downy mildews out there on many different crops, and Subdue Max still has really good activity against them. And in both cases, Segavis is a more expensive, granted, but a much more long-lasting and thorough product for downy mildew. Once you've made a drench of one of these two products, we're going to suggest that you make weekly sprays. We'll talk about what those options are here in a second. And we want to keep doing that until you go through at least 2 weeks without any new infections, and you can stop. What I did was there's quite a few products labeled for downy mildew, and I went through and just kind of cherry picked out the ones that I think are highly effective. So this would be our short list for downy mildew. Phosphite and phostrol are phosphonates, and they're very unique. They actually go systemically into the plant, and they stimulate a plant's natural defenses. So we have seen some curative and some preventative control from these products, and they're very inexpensive. Mycora's claim to fame is it is a quick knockdown of the sporulation phase, and I mentioned a moment ago that one of the problems with downy mildew is how rapidly the spores spread through the greenhouse. So a product such as Mycora that will give you a quick knockdown of the spores is a great way to start your spray routine. Segus, we talked about, you can spray it or drench it. We prefer to drench it because of the extra long longevity. Segway, which you maybe already be using for Pythium, can be used as a spray or a drench, and that can be part of your rotation as well, different mode of action from the others. Stature shares the same mode of action with Mycora, but it's also a very good downy mildew product from a foliar spray. And then we talked about Subdue Max already. We're going to take a kind of a sharp turn here to a totally new topic and talk about biocontrols for insect and mite control. One of the reasons that I wanted to spend some time today talking about biocontrols for insect and mite control is the fact that there's mounting resistance pressure against the insecticides and miticides that we have labeled. Working with our chemical provider partners, we know that there's really weren't any new insecticides that were released this year, and there's nothing really imminent in the pipeline. So I think we need to consider other ways to control these pests, or at least reduce the pesticide pressure by integrating biocontrols wherever we can. Also, I've seen quite a surge in edible crop production in greenhouses, and this isn't just vegetable transplants. These are crops that are grown on to harvest in the greenhouses, and there's really not very many pesticides that are labeled for those types of crops, so using biocontrols could be really beneficial there. Also, the public certainly would prefer that we didn't use any pesticides, and by using biocontrols we can use less pesticides and limit ourselves to some of the safer, shorter residual ones, and that's a good thing all the way around. And something else that we don't really consider is that nearly all pesticide applications have some negative impact on plants that are being treated, even if it's just to put a residue on the leaves. So getting away from pesticides would certainly have a wide number of benefits. One of the things that has been very helpful is that there's been a lot of research that's ongoing and continues to be ongoing that really helps us to increase our knowledge base. And with so many growers now using biocontrols, we're learning anecdotally from them things that are working and not working for them, and we incorporate those into our recommendations. There's been a renewed emphasis on using tools such as banker plants and companion plants, and even some cases trap crops, to improve our scouting and our control, and all of this reduce costs. Something very interesting is that there's some very interesting supplemental food sources and some other innovations that have been developed that are helping us, again, to make biocontrols more effective and less expensive to use. And you might notice that many of the newer pesticides are more likely to be compatible with biocontrols, and you may be aware that GGS Pro maintains a huge database of information on insecticides and fungicides and even plant growth regulators and their effects on biocontrols, so that if you're using biocontrols in your greenhouse and you have an outbreak that's moving faster than your biocontrols can keep up with, we can make recommendations on what will control that hotspot with a minimum impact on the biocontrols that you're using. Some things, if you are thinking about transitioning to either using biocontrols altogether or more likely transition to just using more of them in your operation, it's really important that you examine your spray records, and GGS Pro is available to help you with that. Some pesticides, though, that are relatively safe for humans, can have up to 12 weeks of side effects against biocontrols. A good example would be synthetic pyrethroids, things like decathlon and bifenthrin products such as Avalon. Even though they are considered to have very good human safety, they'll persist up to 12 weeks and be damaging, say, to the predaceous mites that we use. One of the things we can help you with is to help you transition to shorter residual pesticides. So if you're on your way to using more biocontrols, we can take a look at your program and recommend those products that only have a short residual activity against the bios. Also, something that's important is to take an even harder look at your sanitation. When you're using biocontrols, you're going to make sure you do everything you can to tip the balance in favor of the biocontrols and against the insects and mites that trouble you. So kind of taking a second look at your sanitation and tightening up even more can be really helpful for that. An important step in switching over to biocontrols is to take a look at your major crops and kind of catalog the primary insect and mite pests that those crops have. And then you can work with experts, people like the staff at GGS Pro, to figure out which biocontrols you're going to need in order to make sure you're heading off those problems. And you can imagine when using biocontrols, for the most part, we're trying to act preventatively. We can do some come from behind treatments for spider mites and so forth, but ideally we want to be planning ahead and putting out the appropriate biocontrol before the pest appears. We'll help you with release rates and frequencies, things like that, but keep good notes. After a couple of seasons, you may find that you can do this on your own without any help from us. We'll also work with you to identify in advance which compatible pesticides would be available for the pests that you're likely to run into. That way, a quick application of a compatible pesticide could save your program. You don't want to be having to do your research at that point because time is of the essence. So we can help you to anticipate these things in advance, and so you can have them at the ready. A couple of last thoughts on preparing for a switch over to biocontrols, and maybe the best piece of advice I can give you is to start small. Seldom does it make sense to turn a whole range over to biocontrols the first shot. Pick a small house, an isolated area for the herbs or veggies, something like that, and learn the craft there. And we'll work with you really closely and make sure that you're successful. And after you've had a chance to kick the tires and have some success, then you can talk about ramping it up for the rest of your range. It's always important to do effective scouting. I think it becomes even more important when you're using biocontrols, especially in incoming plant material. You're going to want to, if you find some pests on incoming material, we're going to segregate that until we can clean it up. A little bit later on, we'll be talking about plant dips, and that might be where they come in really handy. And also, it's important to start early. If you do propagation on site, we want to start the biocontrols in propagation. And if you're buying in your plant material, as soon as you plant them, you want to start with your biocontrol program. There have been a number of innovations in biocontrols that are helping them to be more successful and easier to use, and one of them is the development of supplemental foods. And although the benefits that these foods provide will vary a little bit depending which biocontrol we're talking about, but in general, all these things apply. One is that it increases longevity and vigor by giving this supplemental food source. It helps them to get off to a faster start, which is really important. And also a higher reproductive capacity. And you'll see that right below we're talking about fewer applications. If the predator mites, let's say, that I'm putting out, by using the supplemental foods, that they have higher reproductive capacity, I may not need to reapply them as often, or I might even be able to reduce my rates. So we think this is a really beneficial breakthrough. And also some of them we put out, we talk about putting the biocontrols out preventatively, and if there's not enough prey out there for them to feed on, that they might perish. And by having the supplemental food, we can keep them alive and vigorous, and to increase their longevity, so that if the pest population does increase, they're already on the job site and working. Just a couple of examples. There'll be more in your handout, but some of the supplemental foods, Efficacy eggs, are very beneficial for Aureus, and Aureus is really the only biocontrol that's effective against the adult stage of western flower thrips, and lacewing, which we use extensively for aphids, especially aphid hotspots. We find that they're generalist feeders. They'll feed on mealybugs and other things as well. And by having these high quality protein sources available, both of these BCAs will reproduce better and faster and give you better results. And they're really easy to apply. You can use just sprinkle a little bit of this on the sticky side of a Post-it note, and you spread them throughout the greenhouse. And both of these highly mobile BCAs, the Aureus and the lacewing, will find them. And you can store it for quite a long time, and if you need to. If you're going from season to season, you can freeze it and it'll still be good. Artemia, which goes under the trade name BioArt Feed from BioBee, is a supplemental food that's really helpful for a couple of important predator mites, Amblysea swirsky, which we use primarily during the hot times of year to control western flower thrips, and a little less so for Amblysea cucumis, which we use most of the rest of the year also for western flower thrips. And they both control some other things as well. Some growers have found that by implementing this particular supplemental food, that they can changed from having to make weekly bulk applications of these predators to every 2 or 3 weeks. So the cost savings are obvious, but not only are we buying less predator mites, but also we reduce the labor that's required to apply them each week. So you can see why we're pretty excited about this. And the BioArt feed is easily applied. You can either distribute it in bulk like you would your predator mites. They've also developed a specialized feed roll tape for feeding them. Phytocetus persimilis is a ferocious predator of spider mites. In fact, that is the only thing that they feed on, and that comes with a little bit of a challenge when you're shipping them to the customers. During transit, there's really nothing they can feed on, because the last thing we want to do is put spider mites in the vial with the persimilis when we're shipping to our customers for obvious reasons. But BioBee has come up with a very unique way around that. They found dried fruit mite eggs the persimilis will feed on, so now they are able to ship them in a state where they're not starving when they come out of the vial. If they're well fed, they establish faster, and the reproductive rate is higher than if they're shipped without any food source at all. Another interesting thing is that as they're feeding on the fruit mites, the persimilis look white, but as soon as they begin to feast on the spider mites, they turn an orangish red color, which gives you a visual indicator that they've gone to work. Now, up to now, sachets of persimilis haven't been available, but this breakthrough is going to change all that. In case you're not familiar with what a sachet is, this is an example of Bioline sachets, and other companies have similar looking packages. And the Amblysia species, there's 4 of them that are found in these sachets. And the food source they use, they put bran in the sachets, and then they put bran mites, sometimes a different type of mite that the predators feed on. And so for a period, depending on the predator, from 4 weeks up to 6 weeks, these sachets pump out large numbers of predator mites through a breeding colony. And this has not been available for persimilis because of the food source issue that we talked about. But now that's all going to change. For the first time, BioBee's made available these sachets with persimilis in them. And although they don't last as long as the Amblysia species type that we were just talking about, this is the first extended release sachet of persimilis that's ever been available. There's 2 different types of sachets. One of them is designed for a fast release where a large number of mites will come out over a short period of time. Within a week, they've all released, and this would be for cleaning up a hot spot. So if some spider mites have gotten ahead of you in a certain area, you could hang these sachets up in that area, and an enormous number of mites will be released into that area and facilitate a cleanup. The other side of the coin would be more of a classic sachet, and these will release mites for 12 days. And if there's spider mites present for continued food source, it'll produce even more than that. This is a really unique product, again, by BioBee, and for the first time, there are slow-release nematodes. I know that sounds crazy, but believe it or not, they have found a way to put the nematodes in a suspended animation state inside of these capsules, and for a period of up to 6 weeks, it'll continue to release nematodes into the crop. I do want to say it's really kind of in the developmental stage. There's small quantities available now for growers to experiment with, but it won't be long before full-scale production will be coming. This will be something we'll be able to offer to you. A couple things that are unique about it is that we can't just broadcast the capsules on top of the soil, so they need to be incorporated into the top 1/4 inch of soil. Each one of these capsules contains 1,600 nematodes, and they come a bag of 200, so we're looking at over 300,000 nematodes. Most of the nematodes are released between weeks 2 and 4. That's where the peak release is, but there's some nematodes released out to week 6. Ideally, if during our peak we've done a very good job of controlling the fungus gnats or the immature stages of thrips that we're going after, then there won't be that many that need to be controlled by the slow release as you get closer to week 6. Now we're going to pivot into herbicide use in greenhouses, and I chose this topic to include in this presentation because we have a digital library full of pictures with problems that have occurred from the improper use of herbicides in greenhouses. So I thought it was worth taking some time to go over the facts. One of the types of herbicides available to greenhouse growers are quick burn downs, and these work on contact, and they don't kill the storage organs that might be underground, so that it's very effective for herbaceous weeds that that pop up under greenhouse benches and so forth around sidewalls, and of course can be used outside of greenhouses as well. They work quickly, sometimes within a few hours if it's relatively hot in the greenhouse. But in all cases, we need to be really sure that we don't get any spray mist up onto the crops that we're trying to work around, because it won't differentiate between the weeds and the desirable crops. Here's a picture. This is one product called Fireworks from OHP, and you can see with this bittercress demonstration that one day after the application, both the 3% and 6% rate totally torched the bittercress, and couldn't happen to a better weed. These products are very unique, and I'm not sure most growers are even aware that they exist. Envoy Plus and Fusilade 2 are both selective post-emergence, and what they'll do is they'll kill grasses or cereal crops, but they're safe on broadleafs and conifers, so they can be used over the top of broadleaf weeds to kill grasses that have come up from between them. So landscapers really like this type of product, but I've had cases, like one in particular, where a grower had purchased a lot of soil that was contaminated with ryegrass and was coming up through the middle of all of their spring ornamentals, and the prospect of going through this half-acre greenhouse and cleaning it all up by hand was just unbelievable. And they were able to use Envoy Plus, spray it right over the top of their annuals. That had no damage to the annuals, but it killed the cereal weed that was coming up through the middle of the crop. So they can, in limited circumstances, they can be very valuable. And as I mentioned, they are registered for greenhouses. Do watch out for that 24-hour REI with the Envoy Plus. So there are only 2 pre-emergent herbicides listed for greenhouse use, and we have many pictures in our digital library of growers that have tried to use other pre-emergent herbicides and cause enormous damage. Sometimes it's vapor activity after that herbicide is applied that actually directly affects the plant. Other times the vapor distills in water droplets on the greenhouse covering, and it drops down over time onto the crop below and causes damage that way. In either case, a really bad situation. So it's vitally important that we stick to the letter of the law and only use these 2 products. Now, SureGuard has a little bit of a nuance there that can be applied in empty greenhouses, and then you can put plants back in 48 hours after the herbicide has been applied and then activated with water over the top of it. Marengo, both the sprayable and the granular form, however, can be applied with plants on benches overhead, so long as the herbicide application doesn't come in contact with the desirable foliage. Marengo has the longer residual. Some of you have used it and know how long Marengo lasts. SureGuard has the advantage of being stronger versus bittercress. These are 2 really good products. This is just one slide to show. This came out of our digital library and shows what happened. A grower applied a pre-emergent herbicide that's not listed for greenhouse use underneath his fledgling cabbage crop, and you can see there was enormous damage to the crop. Some of you have asked about alternatives for glyphosate or Roundup, and there are some products out there. These 3 products that I list here all have the same active ingredient, different concentrations. Their labels vary a little bit, but they're all very suitable substitutes for glyphosate. I will say this, they're not quite as systemic as Roundup is, so they're not going to do quite as good a job of getting down into the root system as glyphosate does, but our growers think they work really well, and that seems to be the consensus. One thing you might want to pay attention to, the concentrations are different, so the rates are a good bit different. If treating greenhouses with edible crops in them is a concern for you, then the Finale XL TNO is the one that you'd want to use. But these are all great products, and if you have any questions about how to use them safely and effectively in and around your greenhouses, feel free to contact GGS Pro. Finale can be applied in greenhouses with plants underneath the benches. However, Roundup, the label forbids that. And this is an example of a grower that sent us a picture. He went off label and applied Roundup under the benches of his poinsettias. Of course, none of the spray came in contact directly with the plants, but there was enough off-gassing from the glyphosate application that it caused fatal damage to his poinsettias. I want to spend some time talking about plant and cutting dips. I find more and more interest from growers on this for good reasons. There's also some unfortunate information that's being spread through popular media that I think we need to make sure that we address that, so we're using everything according to the label. So why would growers consider doing a plant or a cutting dip? And this could be unrooted cuttings, or it could be trays of rooted cuttings, either way. And one of the primary way that we see them being used is for incoming plant material. Growers wishing to, or doing a good job controlling pests, whether using chemicals or biological controls. The last thing they want to do is bring in a shipment of spring annuals in plug trays or in liner trays, and bring along with them a pest problem that's going to really reinfect their entire greenhouse range. So they're doing a really good job of scouting, which we're glad to hear. And the second step of it is that they want to dip this plant material in an insecticide and possible fungicide at the same time in order to reduce or eliminate insects, mites, and disease issues. And the advantage of a dip is obviously you get 100% coverage. The potential downside is, especially when you're dipping flats in there is some potential for disease spread. If you have a root rot disease, let's say, a pathogen in a flat and you dip it, there's a possibility that the next flat dipped in there could pick it up. In actual practice, it really hasn't proven to be a problem, so I don't want to scare you about that, but I thought it's worth mentioning. But up to now, we really haven't seen the consequences that we frankly anticipated would happen from this type of procedure. It's most often used for high-risk plants, especially poinsettias coming in. And of course, they so often have whiteflies with them, unfortunately, or lantana. That'd be an example of where you might really want to start. If you haven't done plant dips before, that'd be a good place to start. It also can be used for bulbs and corms and bare root perennials. Most of the labels that approve dips allow it for that use as well. So how do you utilize a dip? If you're using unrooted cuttings, I think the favorite method for our growers is to put it in some type of a mesh bag. Make sure you don't overfill that bag, because we've got to be able to get solution all around the leaf surfaces. And that way it can be swished around in the solution for several seconds. Make sure you've got it all covered. And then you put it in an area. We certainly don't want to put it in a full sun area. So maybe on a cart in the head house, give it a chance to dry out of full sun, and that will do a good job. If the material that you wish to dip is rooted in a flat, you're going to need a water bath large enough to allow you to submerge the whole flat. And again, we're only doing it for a few seconds, and then we take it back out, and just like the unrooted cuttings, we want to put it in a place where they'll have a chance to dry off from the chemical application that occurs outside of full sun. It's really important to mention that when you look at a pesticide label, there's generally two sets of personal protection equipment that are required. One is for applicators and handlers, and the other is for early entry into treated areas. And as you might imagine, there's more PPE required for people that are actually making the application. Well, anybody involved in a dip application, including those people that take the flats or the rooted cuttings out and put them someplace to dry, are now considered applicators. So that personal protection equipment is required for anybody involved in that process. This is the best bulletin that GGS Pro has seen. Bioworks has done a really good job, and they'll go into a lot more detail than I had the time to do today. You can request this bulletin from GGS Pro, or you can get it from the Bioworks website. We really salute Bioworks for doing such a thorough job. So what products to use? It's really important to mention that the label of the pesticide, whether it's an insecticide, a miticide, or a fungicide, must have plant dip instructions on the label. Anything else is an off-label and therefore an illegal application. So on this slide, you'll see we made a list, and there's fortunately quite a few fungicides, most of them microbial, but not all of them, in nature. So you have a lot of good options there. A lot of our growers favor using Root Shield Plus, the one that has the 2 trichodermas in it, but there's other good products listed here as well that can be very successful for you as fungicides. In terms of insecticides, the list is a whole lot shorter, and how you choose which one to use will probably have a lot to do with what your target organism's in, whether the insects or the diseases that you think are most likely to come in on that plant material. You can see that Botanigard, and I underlined the WP because from a phytotoxicity standpoint, it's a whole lot safer to dip cuttings in the wettable powder rather than the ES version. MP is a relatively recent addition to that list. I mentioned that when we were talking about product changes a little earlier. So you have some other options there. Now, I want to point this out that we read a lot of articles, and maybe you have too, where the expert is talking about using horticultural oils as plant dips. While that is legal on at least one oil product in Canada, as of today, there's no horticultural oils that we can find in the United States that have a plant dip label on them. I spoke to our friends at Bioworks about Sulfoil-X, and they say they don't anticipate that they'll ever be able to get a plant dip label for that in the United States. So stay tuned. If that changes, we'll let you know. But just beware of these recommendations, unfortunately, are off-label, and we can't endorse them. Moving on to whitefly control, I think even if you're not a poinsettia grower, you still may be battling whiteflies on other crops. We see that on herbs a good bit, lantana and hibiscus, some other crops there. So I think it would be good to have a quick discussion about whitefly control. It'll lead us into some drench recommendations that'll help you on other crops as well. There are very effective biological controls available for whitefly control, and if that's something you're interested in, we'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's really important that scouting is done for early detection. It's a difficult pest because of its reproductive capacity to come from behind on. So we want to make sure we see the first occurrence of the whitefly so we can take action in a timely manner. Resistance to whitefly products is significant, and most of you are probably aware of the Cubi type whitefly that is really, there's only a handful of mode of actions that we feel like are still effective against that whitefly. And so we need to be really good stewards of the chemicals we have, and we also, again, want to make sure we don't try to come from behind. In most cases, GGS Pro recommends a see and treat approach to pests. Insect pests will tell you to wait till you see the whites of their eyes, or in case of whiteflies, the red of their eyes, before making a treatment. But whiteflies, especially on vulnerable crops such as lantana and poinsettias, we work preventatively. It's not a matter of if, but when you're going to see them in your crop, and so we want to work ahead. After doing a lot of research recently on any current research on efficacy of products towards whiteflies, we've really come to the conclusion that mainspring should be a part of the whitefly programs. And we'll talk a little bit about the nuances involved in drenching mainspring and how to make it work the very best way in a minute. I will tell you that the trials show that conclusively that mainspring has the longest residual control of any of the products labeled for whiteflies, anywhere from 8.5 up to 10 weeks, and Syngenta claims even longer control. And we'll tell you how to get that long control in just a moment. Safari, which has been a tried and true product for whiteflies, we found that because of the Cubi type whitefly, although we recommended 12 ounces per 100 gallons for many years, we've had to increase that rate to 18 ounces per 100 gallons to still get good control. It is still the fastest knockdown of whiteflies from a drench that you can make. Contos is something we had recommended a lot to poinsettia growers over the past couple of years. We like the fact that it also controls mites and thrips that can come in early in the poinsettia crop as well. I do need to tell you, over the last 2 years, we've had some notable failures where it was, even at the high rate, not able to provide adequate control. So we're not telling you not to use Contos, but keep your eyes open to see whether or not this is a trend that's going to continue in terms of resistance to Contos. Mainspring, here's what we've learned about it. One, it's not a real strong come from behind product, and if you request our whitefly bulletin for poinsettias, you'll see that we have growers start off with a Safari drench, and that way we know that come early October when we want to drench with mainspring that we're delivering a very clean crop over to the mainspring. From that point on, the residual control is quite long and it's highly effective. So we mentioned the fact we want to start with low pest populations. That's one way to ensure the success. And if you're not going to drench Safari ahead of it, we'll show you a list of effective sprays for whiteflies that you can use to make sure that before you drench with mainspring, you've reduced the numbers down. Mainspring is unique in that it really requires a better established root system than some of the other products. Syngenta will recommend for poinsettias, for example, that you might wait 3 or 4 weeks after the pinch in order to put the mainspring drench down. At that point, you've got a pot full of roots, and this will ensure the uptake. It's also important that, although we say this for all drenches that we make, it's more important for mainspring that the soil is moist. And the reason for that is that moist soil will allow for thorough penetration of the root system, and there won't be sections of root that don't get treated. They also require a little higher drench volume for mainspring than most of our other drench products, about 2/3 of a normal irrigation. GGS Pro's done the work for you, and we have a table that you can request at no charge that will tell you, based on the pot size, how much the drench volume should be. The last thing I would leave you with on mainspring is when you think about the cost, we know it's an expensive product to use. Think about the weeks of control and what would need to be done otherwise in terms of other sprays and so forth that would need to be done to get you the same length of control and quality of control that mainspring will give you. And let that be part of your assessment about whether or not it's a cost that you want to bear. Promise you a list of whitefly sprays. I'll go over a couple of them. Prodia is in the same mode of action as mainspring. So if you're intending to drench your crop with mainspring later on, then we don't recommend Prodia. But otherwise, Prodia has proven to be a very good whitefly product. Give you a couple of weeks control. Rycar, even on the Cubia type, has done a very good job. Some of these others, Sandmite and Savat, are often used when we need whitefly control, but there's also the possibility of mites being present. That's often the case with poinsettias. Both Lewis mite and spider mite can show up. Ventigra is relatively new. It's in the same rough family tree as Endeavor and Rycar, so we don't rotate between the three of them. In trials recently, at the high rate of 7 ounces per 100 gallons, Ventigra has shown very good whitefly control. The Avid and Azadirachtin tank mix might surprise you. It actually works better on the Cubia type than it did on the B. That's probably just due to what's been applied to them over time. And as you can see below, there's quite a few good Azadirachtin products you could use. And then we also have, especially for vegetables and herbs, we like to use one of the microbials, and there's a long list of them down there. You can see Ancora, Bioceres, Botanigard, and Velifer are all very good biologicals that can be used in concert with an Azadirachtin Azadirachtin spray to get very good control. Your horticultural oils, especially early in the crop, if you can coat the underside of the leaves, it's very effective at the immature stages only of whiteflies. And then your insecticidal soaps, we use them pretty much the same way we do the oils. Thought it'd be a good idea to talk about what GGS Pro is recommending for thrips control. This is another pest with enormous resistance issues, and so we want to let you know what's really working and to avoid you making sprays that won't be effective. And you'll notice across the top of the screen, Steinernema feltii is a beneficial nematode, and drenched on the surface of the soil is a quick knockdown of the prepupal and pupal stage of thrips that occur on the surface of the soil. All the products on this page are really what we consider quick knockdowns. So if you discover a population of thrips building up, these are the types of products you want to use first to get the maximum knockdown. And then we'll talk about some longer residual products to follow up with. So again, the Avid Azatin O, or one of the other Azadirachtin products, is still very effective. We recommend 2 sprays 7 days apart before rotating to something else. We would give you the same timing for Pylon. I still think that Pylon, if you give me 1 application to kill as many thrips as possible tonight, I'm still going to select Pylon from that. You might want to make a note that we don't use the maximum label rate of Pylon. We only need 5.2 ounces per 100 gallons, which equates to 1/3 of a teaspoon per gallon to get the really good thrips control with Pylon. And obviously that's another expensive product, so let's not use any more than we need to. And then the Pylon Total Release is available for busy growers in the springtime. Hachi Hachi, the new formulation is a lot safer in terms of plant safety than the original formulation. There are still 4 or 5 crops on the label that you can't treat, but it is a different mode of action than we typically use on thrips, so that could be a possibility for you. Mainspring as a spray or a drench is effective against thrips. To get the really long residual, you'd want to go back to the whitefly slides and take a look at all of the precautions we give you about drenching mainspring to get maximum effectiveness. Preventatives is a combination of two active ingredients, and it has provided a very good knockdown for thrips, can last for 1 to 2 weeks from one spray. These are products that you might use after you've gotten the thrips population under control, but you want to keep the pressure up on them and you need to rotate to different modes of action. Now, I see across the top of the slide we have several BCAs that are very effective against thrips control. Love to help you with a discussion about that. Pedestal is an insect growth regulator, gives about 1 to 2 weeks of control on thrips. Remember that it only works on the immature stages, so you need to wait a week or more to evaluate the effect it had on your adult population. Contos as a drench only, it doesn't work as a spray, but as a drench, is very effective against thrips. It takes 2 or 3 weeks for the Contos to fully take up through the plant and become effective, but after that, you get 5 to 7 weeks control. It's hard to beat. And of course, it controls aphids and other pests as well. Overture works primarily on the early immature stages, so growers sometimes spray it and don't see any effects for a few days and they get discouraged. But if you will monitor your adult sticky card numbers and you wait out 7 days, then you'll see the effectiveness of Overture. So we think that's not a good knockdown, but a good follow-up. Grandiva CG is kind of a unique product. It's actually isolated from a chromobacterium and is not a quick kill at all, but research shows that 3 sprays made a week apart, at the end of that 3 weeks, you'll see a significant decrease in your thrips population. And since it's OMRI listed and has lots of edible crops on the label, that might be an option for you. And down below, you'll see various combinations of microbial products, along with both horticultural oils and an azadirachtin-based IGR. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you'd use those in a program. Before we get to that, I wanted to mention the fact a lot of growers tell us that they have pretty good thrips control when their baskets are down on the benches or if they're growing them, starting them on the floors. But 4 or 5 weeks into the crop, they're getting ready to hang them up, and they really want something long-lasting for thrips they can drench into the crop. And there's really only 2 options. That would be Contos and Mainspring, and both of those, for the average spring hanging basket, if you drench them 5 weeks into the crop, then it'll continue the thrips control until that crop is sold and out of the greenhouse. Now, we mentioned the tank mixing of microbial insecticides and everything that I'm going to tell you about the azadirachtin-based IGRs. You could transfer that over to the horticultural oils, especially for crops that will tolerate them. So this is a way that you can use these products in a series of sprays, because this is quite different than using a traditional chemical insecticide or miticide. Your soft-bodied insects, aphids, thrips, and whiteflies can all be controlled very convincingly using this system. So what we do on day 1, you can select any of these microbials, do a good job for you, and use one of the azadirachtin-based IGRs as a tank mix. 3 days later, we come back with just the microbial, and what we're doing here is we need to keep the number of infective spores up long enough and high enough to get a high infection rate. Your IGRs, your azadirachtin are only labeled to be used once per week, and they last that long anyway, so we don't include that in the second spray. But then at day 8, 4 days later, we make another application of the microbial and the azadirachtin-based IGR. This has worked very well. It started out being popular with edible crop growers that didn't have a lot of options, but some of them had such good success with it that they use it on their ornamentals as well. Broad mites are something that we're seeing more and more of. I've even had some employees and some customers tell me they're showing up on their garden plants, probably coming in low numbers on the bedding plants they bought during the springtime. I want to include this picture. They're very, very small. A 40x hand lens is what most people think they need to be able to see them. Certainly for me, that's the case. I have had some people with younger eyes that say they can see them with a 20x hand lens, but I leave that up to you. But we like to use a microscope in the office to positively identify them. And one of the unique features is that the egg stage is almost as large as the adult, and you can see it has this unique geometric design on it. And even after the egg is hatched out, what you'll see, it looks like a deflated version of the same thing that'll last for a couple of weeks. So the adults are very reclusive. They're hiding deep in growing tips and so forth, and even between flower petals. So the eggs can't hide, they can't run and hide, and because they persist so long, that's a really good way to tell whether or not the distorted growth that you're seeing is due to broad mites or not. They inject a toxin as they feed, so the most common symptom is distorted growing tip tissue. Sometimes it'll get so bad that it almost turns black, like it's been burned. You'll often notice that the flower buds in the axils will not form normally either. They just get dark and they stall out. They're very difficult to spray because of the fact that they tuck themselves away into protected spots. So when we talk about pesticides or miticides to use for them, we're going to favor those that have translaminar activity so they get deep down into that tissue that is difficult to spray. The symptoms can vary greatly depending on the species of the plant, so it's always a good idea to send GGS Pro a picture and we'll let you know whether or not we find that suspicious for broad mites or not. Here's a picture of Gerber daisies, one of their favorite hosts, and you can see that they're working their way up the plant into the growing tip tissue. The oldest leaves look pretty much normal, but as that plant continues to progress, the spider mite numbers build, and they're injecting that toxin there. You can see the leaves are getting hard and leathery and misshapen, and this would be hard to miss in terms of symptoms, but at this stage, we really let it go way too long. So here's some of the products. Now, it's important to point out that not every miticide that controls spider mites will also affect broad mite and cyclone mite. In fact, the list is considerably smaller. On this slide, any of the products that are in italics have translaminar activity, and because of that, we're going to favor them in terms of control. It is good to point out that in terms of biocontrol that all the Amblysia species mites will feed on broad mites and cyclone mites. The catch is that if you already have an infestation, broad mites that is causing symptoms, that it's really too late to use those biocontrols. But on the other side of the coin, if you're using, let's say, cucurbitacin and putting out either inundated releases for thrips, or you're using the sachets, so there's a number of predator mites coming out over a long period of time, they will suppress and maybe keep that broad mite or cyclone mite problem from ever becoming a problem. As we wrap up, I just wanted to let you know that since the springtime, GGS Pro has been producing a fairly large number of educational videos that are on our website. We have the website address there for you. They are short, anywhere from 3, maybe up to 7 or 8 minutes, depending on the topic. And so we hope there's things that you can catch on the fly, and they're very detailed and often have pictures and images along to help out with that. And we do want to let you know that if you have topics that you'd like to see videos made of that we haven't yet gotten to, feel free to shoot us a note. We always like those suggestions. This is just a small sampling here, just to give you an idea of some of the different topics. You can see, of course, we do a lot of material with insect and mite control, both biological and chemical, but there's quite a few other things in terms of nutrition and sanitation, PGRs. We have more than 25 of them published right now, and some of them are crop specific, others are more general in nature. I hope you find them useful. Wrap things up, there's 2 GGS Pro products I want to make you aware of. You may already know about the technical reference guide. We admit to being biased, but we think it's the most unique and most useful product of its type out on the market, and a lot of that has to do with the 18,000 calls and emails we take a year from all of you that helps us to know what's going on out in the field and what those frequently asked questions are and the remedies. So I hope that you'll find that book really useful. And then a new product is the Pocket Guide from GGS Pro. It's 70 pages, and on one side it has either a picture of an abiotic disorder, that would be things like edema or pesticide toxicity, something like that. On the back side, it tells you all about it, including the remedies. Also, nutritional disorders are in there as well. So I hope you'll check that out and see if you might find that useful as a teaching tool at your operation. Thank you very much for being part of this educational seminar today.